welcome to Irish American Magazine. My name is Tom Deignan. Today, it is our good fortune to have a guest who has served in many ways literally as the voice of the Irish immigrant experience. For decades, as the lead singer of the groundbreaking Celtic rock band Black 47. In his downtime, he writes plays, he writes fiction. He's got a new novel out. He's got a new musical coming to Broadway. To call this guy a Renaissance man, frankly, is to give too much credit to Renaissance men. Our guest today is Larry Kirwan. Larry, welcome to Irish American Magazine.
It's a pleasure, Tom.
Now, Larry, I know this Paradise Square. Let's talk about the musical first. Paradise Square is the musical. I know it's been something you've been working on for quite a long time, and there's actually several layers to this story once COVID gets involved and all that. So first, tell us the background. How long have you been working on Paradise Square?
Well, you could say I've probably been working on it all my life in a way, because the very first idea I got from it came way back in Wexford. I was raised by an old grandfather, and oddly enough, his boyhood friend and he had made a pact that they would always stay in touch with each other. Kid's name was Ned Cudahy, and he emigrated to the US, and he never wrote back. And of course, he didn't have an address when he was leaving. And my grandfather, even 50, 60 years later, used to say, poor Ned, he probably got lost in the 5 Points. It still irked him all that years later. And I was thinking, the 5 Points, what is that? And I learned it was, a rough area of New York. And then when I came to New York, I was living in the East Village, and I was only blocks away from it. So I used to go down to the 5 Points, and I became kind of fascinated with the area. And around that time, I used to hang out a lot in secondhand bookstores, particularly the Strand. And they got used to me there, and they used to let me look at the, expensive books. I would only buy the very cheap ones. But one day, looking at an old history book, I saw etchings of the African American dance halls in the 5 Points. And I knew about that there was music that Irish and African American musicians had gotten together and created bands for these dance halls. So I was looking at the bands. It was always the same. There would be two Irish, usually a fiddle player and a singer, and two African Americans, a percussionist and a banjo player. And I used to wonder, how did they know what to play? And I figured eventually the Irish fiddle player was playing jigs and reels, and the African Americans were improvising against them. And I was playing in improv bands at that point, where you just go out and you make it up as you go along. And then I began to look at the dancers, and it struck me it was always an African American man and an Irish woman. And the artist who did the etchings, to make a point, I suppose, showed these couples always smiling and with a warmth on their faces for each other. And I could tell that across this time that these couples were romantically involved. And I began to research that and found out, sure enough, they were called amalgamationists. And the uptown Protestants, as the Catholics called them, as the Irish immigrant Catholics called them, hated this whole idea of Irish and African Americans amalgamating. And from that, I kind of got into the whole idea this part of history had been forgotten about or had been buried, probably purposefully. Both sides, neither side wanted to talk about it. And at that point, I was a Stephen Foster fan because his music was big in Ireland. And, I realized that Foster had lived in the 5 Points too. So it all kind of came together to write a musical based on the amalgamationists, with a Black woman owner of a dance hall as the lead character, and to use Stephen Foster songs in there, and turned them around in much the same way Chris Byrne and I turned around, Irish jigs and reels and mixed them up with reggae and funk and punk and whatever. And that became Hard Times. I started that in 2011. And in 2012 and 2013, we did productions of this musical Hard Times in the Cell on 23rd Street. And then a gentleman called Peter LeDon showed up one night, and he loved it, put me in touch with Garth Drabinsky in Toronto. He wanted to work on it with me. I went up to Toronto and worked on it. We worked on it together for a while, and then he started to bring in a lot of other talent. Bill T. Jones, the choreographer, Moises Kaufman, and many others. And here we are 8 years after that. And we did it out in Berkeley Rep. It was a big success there. Then COVID came, and now we're opening in the Nederlander in Chicago on Tuesday night. And then it comes to Broadway in March.
So the story behind Paradise Square, you have a love story told sort of in a melting pot setting. And yet you also have as the backdrop one of the most horrific events in New York history and American history, the New York City draft riots, immigrants and other working class people fighting, opposing the draft into the Civil War. How do you bring that into the story?
Well, I didn't just bring it in. Being a dramatist or being interested in drama, I knew the draft riots. I placed it right in the middle of the draft riots, the actual action of the book, because for one thing, if you're putting something on stage, it's good to have it within a fixed time period. The draft riots lasted for 4 days, so this musical lasts for 2 days of the draft riots. And also the sadness of the thing is that when the draft riots happened, people kind of went back to their own. There were 11 African Americans lynched, and the amalgamationists were attacked, and many of them left the city and were kind of subsumed into African American settlements in New Jersey, Staten Island, and Long Island, and Brooklyn. Many did stay in Manhattan, but they had to kind of keep their heads down for a long period of time. And the African American dance halls were all closed. So the era of amalgamationists ended on July 13th, 1863. And for purposes of drama, that kind of worked, you know.
Larry, you're in Chicago right now. Tell us some of the things you've been up to. What are you doing out there in Chicago?
One of the things I've been doing is going out to, I've been up at the Irish Heritage Center 2 or 3 times, because this story is a piece of the Irish American immigration jigsaw that has been lost all this time. I mean, other writers have dealt with it and everything, but there's a different thing when you're doing a musical. It's really been exposed to the world and publicity, and it's been relived every night. And there's a real excitement out there in the Irish American community to learn about these events. Nobody really heard of amalgamation. It was a buried part of history. And, you know, being a musician, I'm probably closer to a lot of African Americans because, you know, we grew up listening to, you know, Otis Redding, The Temptations. That music was lifeblood to people like me. And then Black 47 played the funk and reggae and everything. So I see the similarities between the Irish and African American communities probably in a way that many people don't. So it's been exciting to work on it it's a mixed community. I think there's 35 actors altogether in it, and there's 36, and there's 18 Black and 18 white. And so we're living as a community and dealing with these events of that time, the coming together of the two communities and then the splitting apart. So it's been really a valuable lesson, a life's lesson to do this. And of course, we've done, I think, 3 different workshops before this and another production. So we're reliving these great events and tragic events in the lives of the two communities, the coming together and then the ripping apart. And there's a real excitement because of it. And it is definitely excitement in the Irish American community here in Chicago. And I think it will be the same thing when we get back to New York. It's a piece of history that's coming back to life. Here in Chicago right now, we're at the tech stage of rehearsal. And with a big musical and so many pieces to move around, tech takes a long time. Tech is basically when the lighting and the sound is done and the cast really gets used to the scenery and the setting. And it's a huge job, and that goes on for maybe 10 days. The dress rehearsal is this Saturday coming. So we're only 3 or 4 days away from it. So there's this excitement. And then there's apprehension because everyone doesn't totally know it yet, So you get it up on stage in front of an audience, and then it's like, what do we have, But we don't open officially until the 17th of November. So we'll have some time to fix it then, or fix whatever needs fixing. Hopefully there won't be too much.
Now, Paradise Square is coming out at a time, it's a strange time for the entertainment business. Things have gotten very political. Things that were fine 5-10 years ago are being rewritten, are being changed. There was an article in New York Times just this week. Prominent Broadway musicals are being rewritten to sort of update them for audiences today. Has that made things more challenging? Has that made putting on the show more challenging? You are dealing with combustible material here.
I'm only really interested in combustible material. If you look back at the Black 47 songs, there were a lot of, funny ones and everything, but there was a lot of serious material we were dealing with, like with James Connolly and Paul Robeson and the various things, Bobby Sands, we were always, on the cutting edge. So to me, it's not worth it doing some frothy piece, because you have to put so much into these things, and to get them right then is really hard, so you might as well do something that's important and combustible. But I actually think we can have an effect on what's going on at this time, because if you look back to the period between the quote-unquote famine Irish arriving in 1845 and 1863, when amalgamationism ended, it was one of the most combustible times in American history. The Civil War was going on, and there was anti-Catholicism. There was definitely an anti-Black feeling, an anti-Irish feeling. And it far outweighs what we're going through now. So if such great things could happen back then, there's no reason why they can't happen now. This is not the end of the world. It's not, Berlin 1936 or 1937. We're all watching too much CNN and Fox. Is what the problem is nowadays. We should get out and go for a run. I think that's why I got back into nature. I've been kind of raised on a farm in Wexford, and I've been living in the city so long and everything. The only time I would see nature is when I'm in the back of a van with Black 47 heading along Route 80 or 95. So I had that time off up in Connecticut, and it was great getting into the ospreys, getting into nature again.
Kind of a more broad question here. Over the years, whether it's music, writing, plays, whatever you do, have you noticed a change in being an Irish American artist? Are audiences greeting you differently? Do you feel expressing yourself? You feel yourself expressing yourself differently? Has being an Irish American artist changed over recent years?
Yeah, people have loosened up. When I came over here first in the '70s, the '50s generation was running things, and Irish America was like really conservative. I mean, Ireland was really conservative back at that time too, but Irish America was really conservative. And then the whole Troubles thing, and I think the Bobby Sands hunger strikes loosened up Irish America a lot and began to let people, relate back to the problems that were going on in Ireland at the time, and there was a radicalism that started to come into Irish America, and then Black 47 was the voice of that radicalism, and we had an effect around the country. It still stayed conservative. Irish people are pretty conservative, but they're open. There's gay rights. When we did the song Danny Boy and changed it into a piece about a gay Irish construction worker, you know, uh, people running festivals have come up to me and say, we love Black 47. We love your stuff on Ireland and on the north of Ireland, but could you please not do Danny Boy tonight? And I would always say, oh man, I wasn't going to do it, but thanks for reminding me. But that's the way it was. And now things are a lot looser. I was up in the Irish Heritage Centre a couple of nights ago, and I did a talk up there about Paradise Square, and people were fascinated by this whole idea of a piece of their history that they had no idea about. They could all be lying, but everyone is coming to see it. It's causing a bit of a stir here. So I do think that Irish America has loosened up. Still has its conservative side, but there's nothing wrong with conservatism as long as you're not stopping other people from moving forward. I never minded conservatism. I mean, Black 47 had a big right wing and a big left wing, but an even bigger center. People are there for the music, and if they learn something from the radical songs, so much the better. But if not, they can get up and dance around to Funky Kaylee. It didn't bother me.
What kind of music style should audiences expect when they go to see Paradise Square?
Well, it's still based quite a bit on the music of Stephen Foster, but we've taken that music forward so that it's modern, and there's a lot of different influences in there. And then there are some new songs in there, totally new songs, divorced from Foster, that are in there to drive the story along. And so it's a mixture of musics. It's a big orchestra, well, big for me anyway. It's a 14-piece orchestra. And Jason Howland, the musical director, is also a great songwriter. But just a tremendous arranger of music. And the voices are kind of amazing because everyone in the cast can sing, some better than others, but he has a way of getting people to put forward their best voice. So it's very choral at times too, and very soulful because of the African American quotient. And it's, I think people are going to love the music. Yeah.
Now, I do want to spend a little time, Larry, talking about the new book. The new book is Rockaway Blue. It is set around 9/11. The 20th anniversary of September 11th just passed. Larry, where were you on that day?
I was in New York, just like I was there. I lived on the bottom of Soho, right above Canal Street, so I was pretty close to the event when it happened. And the book gestated over the 20 years, just kind of like Paradise Square did in a way. Part of it came about really because we went into Connolly's Black 47 almost immediately after it because there was no music in New York, and Midtown, as you remember, was totally deserted. So we felt that if we started playing regularly in Connolly's on 45th Street, we would get people back into the city at night times. And that's what happened. But the first nights, the first Saturday nights, 4 or 5, the same phenomenon happened every night because we didn't know who was alive and who was dead at that point, if you remember. And so we didn't advertise the gig, we just put the word out with people. But a lot of first responders came up from the pit. And when the door would open, everybody would look over instantly. And it was always, oh, Tom, it's great. Tom made it out alive, or Mary didn't go into work that day and she escaped. But I began to think, how about Michael or Michelle? They're not going to be coming through the door anymore. So I wanted to write a novel that would capture the story of the people who had died, but more importantly, about the people who had survived through it. And so I did Rockaway Blue, but it took me a long, long time to get it right. And then when I finally got to a certain stage, I found it's been too recent and I didn't really want to go out and promote it. It just seemed like, it's just too soon. But then around 2018, when on 9/11, I forgot all about it, about the whole thing. And I thought, wow, maybe this is the time to release it. But then COVID came around, and so it's been difficult. But the book is finally out, and I'm really happy with it because I did exactly what I wanted to do with the writing of it. I got the story right. It's about a family out in Rockaway Beach. The son gets killed, and the mother, of course, is decimated by this. The father, too. And 2 years after it, it's set 3 years after, but 2 years after the event, the father finds out that the son was actually in the tower 30 minutes before the plane struck. And what was he doing there? And then he walks into, denials and everything. And he realizes there's some kind of a cover up going on. So it's about the family and it's about the mystery. And I think it's about how people can go through tremendous grief and yet at the same time come out the right side of it.
For me, what was really good about Rockaway Blue, I mean, it's a real page turner. There's a mystery wrapped up in this story. It includes different parts of the city that, you mentioned Connolly's, everyone knows Times Square, but this is really like a 5-borough book. These are parts of New York City that really should get more attention and don't. That's what I liked a lot about Rockaway Blue. Tell us if you moving on, as we wrap up here, tell us, Larry, if you plan to be going over to Ireland anytime soon. Have you been there recently, or any plans to go anytime soon?
Oh yeah, yeah. Every year I take about 70 or 80 people over on a tour, and I was supposed to be there right now, but I obviously had to be here in Chicago, and at the same time, it didn't seem kind of right to take people over at this point, particularly if somebody picked up the virus over there, and what would you do with them? It'd be, it would present a lot of problems. So we transferred the tour to next year, or rescheduled for next October. So that'll probably be the next time I go back, I would say, because I'm stuck here in Chicago now, and then I'll have to be in New York for the play, and I'll probably go in October next year.
Now, before we officially started talking, you and I you had mentioned yet another couple of ideas, musical ideas you have that you're working on right now. Tell us a little bit about what we can expect in the future from you.
I'm working on a long time, because I think it's a great untold American story, is the war in Iraq. So I have of course, Black 47 had an album out called Iraq, and I have a musical of that ready to go. So I'm actually supposed to do a workshop of it in December in New York. And then I have another one about the life and times of Brendan Behan, but not concentrating on his drinking, but on the man himself and his interests as a political person, and as his writing and his singing and his love of Irish. And there's just been so many more things have come out about Behan in the last 5 or 10 years, including the fact that he had 2 children by different women at the same time. So that sets up a great drama, as you can imagine. So that's called The Catacombs. And then I have a new one that I started doing during the pandemic, because I knew I was going to be indoors a lot. It's kind of about my life living in the East Village and being, playing in CBGBs and places like that. It's a two-hander about a relationship between a young guy and a young woman who are in a band and are romantically involved, and then they get split up and they meet again 25 years later, and they get an offer to do songs in a movie, and can they rekindle the working relationship, and can they rekindle the romantic relationship? And the last one, I got a commission to do a stage version of The Informer, which I'm almost finished at this point.
Larry, they have this thing called Netflix now. You should get yourself an account. You should learn to relax a little bit. We've been talking to Larry Kirwan, best known as the frontman for Black 47. He's got a new novel out. It's called Rockaway Blue. He's got a new musical that is about to open in Chicago, and then it will make its way to Broadway. Tell us again all the details, Larry, when it opens and where.
In Chicago at the Nederlander Theater on November 2nd. It's a 5-week run. And then we moved to New York, and it opens for previews on February 22nd, and it opens for real on March 20th. And you can get tickets for both of them now. If you go to paradisesquaremusical.com, all one word, paradisesquaremusical.com. You'll get all the details you need on it.
Larry Kirwan, thank you for joining us on Irish America Magazine.